The Chosen Season 4, Episode 5 is packed with a ton of different things, but one of the most striking moments here for sure is when the Romans actually force Jesus and the followers to carry their gear. This is a thing that actually happened, and we're going to talk about it as we go through this scene right here.
Halt! Jewish citizens!
Everyone remain calm.
So obviously this would be a very scary thing no matter what. As a Jewish person, you're in front of a battalion of Roman soldiers, right? This group of Roman soldiers. They are threatening. They are not very nice, right? As we know, this is a pretty big deal. They would all be really, really scared here because the Romans could pretty much do anything and get away with it, as we've seen in previous episodes, right?
Disarm yourselves and leave your bags. You're carrying ours now.
Under Roman law, a soldier can force a Jew to carry his things.
So I love how they add in Matthew's kind of explainer here. Obviously, they know that this law exists. Philip even says later in the scene that he's done this several times before. This is called angaria or impressment. And so basically what the Romans would do is any Roman soldier who was headed along the road, they could have a civilian take their gear and take it 1 mile outside the city. It's generally that this happened right from a city outside the city, and there was always a mile marker that would kind of end the portion of road that they were on. So this is a little bit less likely where there's just random citizens that just happen to be walking along the road and then you grab them and force them to carry your gear for the next mile. Yes, this could happen, but I think more commonly you would see that they would grab civilians from a city and then they would force them to walk 1 mile outside of the city to the mile marker specifically. And so that's kind of how it would work originally. And here we're seeing Matthew explain it just a little bit here. We see Matthew's reaction to this is, okay, this is a Jewish law, we follow, or this is a Roman law, we follow it. We see Judas's reaction here, and it's not as compliant.
At random.
There is a legal limit, a maximum of 1 mile and no further. Master, this is humiliating.
We will comply with dignity.
I think that's probably the hardest part of this scene for a lot of people that were watching this, is seeing that shoved on Jesus' head like that. Obviously not very fun. It's also foreshadowing to other things that are going to be shoved on Jesus' head. For example, the crown of thorns. Very similar, right, to what we're going to see later on, but obviously much, much worse.
What must it be like walking around all day with no metal weighing your head down? Ever have helmet hair?
So this definitely gives us a little bit of an insight about what of how the Romans are going to be in the future, especially during the crucifixion of Jesus. If we see some of that, that's going to be hard for sure. Way harder than this moment here, but this is just kind of a peek into that. We see that the Romans are carrying a couple of different things. We see them carrying spears, okay, the Roman spears. They have shields. Then they also have their packs filled with all different types of stuff. They have pots for cooking. They probably have extra clothes. They probably have just different supplies that they would carry along with them. And obviously that gets heavy over time.
You too.
You. I think that...
I'm not made of straw, Matthew. I can carry it.
She says, I'm not made of straw, Matthew. I can carry it. But of course, this would probably be even more terrifying for Mary. Remember what triggered her to relapse in season 2 was this whole situation, right? Season 2, episode 6, well, episode 5, then episode 6, we see as Mary relapses, she gets terrified by a Roman, which causes her to really get scared. And then this demon appears that scares her even more. And then she relapses and goes back to gambling and drinking and doing all these things. And so here she's probably feeling a lot of those same feelings. Also, think about what Thomas is feeling through this whole situation as well. We see as Thomas is again interacting with a bunch of Romans here who have just killed Rama. This is a really, really terrifying thing for him as well, and the whole rest of the group, I'm sure.
Hurry along, rats! Rats with nice hats.
Again, name calling was very common for the Roman people. They didn't see the Jews as people, they saw them as underlings in a lot of ways. James really struggling through this. Little James, obviously he's injured, and so he has that malady that we've talked about for the last several seasons, and so now obviously he's having to carry a bunch of stuff along with that. It's got to hurt pretty bad.
Master, let me take that. You should not have to. No.
Now this right here, Judas tries to take the helmet, try to give Jesus some more dignity. Jesus is not going to do that. He's going to sit in this in humility as he should. Now what's interesting here as well, look at the shape that Jesus is carrying. I think this is definitely foreshadowing as well, even if unintentional. I think this shot specifically of Jesus holding the pack in his right hand, showing us the form of a cross as Jesus is carrying his cross. I think this is really intentional. Now, let's dive into some of these verses that we have here for what is going on with all of the stuff that happens here. We see that this begins in Matthew chapter 5, which is the Sermon on the Mount. This is obviously a large section that we have gone through a ton of because of Jesus teaching it in The Chosen, and bits and pieces of this keep on coming up throughout this season so far. For example, we see this with Big James and John as they are talking about, hey, you told us that if we ask, then, the questions will be answered. If we seek, then we will find. If we knock, the door will be open. So we're going to ask you for what we want, right? They misinterpreted that and used it in the wrong way. However, here we see that this is in the correct way, and Jesus is a perfect example of what is going on here. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, we see, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn him the other cheek also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, leave him your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Again, this is the engaria, or the impressment, that is happening with the Romans here as they are impressing their gear upon these people in order for them to carry it 1 mile. Okay, that's kind of how it works here. Give the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Now, Jesus goes even further than this in the Sermon on the Mount, in more than retaliation, more than what you're supposed to do back to a person. He goes all the way over here. Love your enemies. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. This is what the leaders of the day taught. This is what the Sanhedrin would have taught. This is what the Pharisees would have taught through the oral law. They would have said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? What good is that? If you love those who already love you, that's easy, right? What reward do you have? Do not even tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Again, Jesus showing the importance of the law and how it cannot be fulfilled, right? But here he's saying, love your enemies. This is a really big portion here that we're seeing in this moment. Now, as we jump back into the episode, we see the kind of reactions to the Romans doing this to Jesus and to the rest of the group.
It is no more unsuitable on my head than any of yours. We both know that is not true. Thank you for your concern, Judas.
So listen there again. This scene is partially about Judas here. We're hearing those coins in the music again, right here as Judas gets pushed. Again, this is purposeful that they're adding this here. Right there, the coins, the same coins we hear in later. But before we get to that, I want to invite you to go to Israel with us. I know that these videos are great and you're learning a lot through this series, but there is nothing like being there in person and seeing exactly what happens in Israel. What there is to learn, and the people to meet, the food to eat, everything. This next trip that I've planned is the cheapest that I can possibly get these trips. Normally they're $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000, but my trip here is less than $4,000. We'd love for you to be a part of it, and if you can at all sign up, there's a link down in the description down below, or you can take your phone's camera and point it at this QR code and it'll take you directly to the site. From there, you can check out our brochure and see exactly what we're doing, and you can even save your spot with a $500 deposit. As you're seeing here, we had some of the most amazing moments in our last trip to Israel, and we'd love for you to be part of the next one. So don't wait, sign up today. Spots are limited as always. Now, as we continue on, we get back to the Roman scene here, and we finish up the first mile as they're all kind of talking. Matthew's struggling here.
I got you. It's not that I'm humiliated. I am. It's that I'm so murderously angry that doing this to him.
I've done this plenty. It doesn't get any easier the next time.
So Philip says, I've done this plenty. Doesn't get any easier the more that you do it, basically. Now here we're seeing Jesus carry his cross. This is a verse that I love, obviously, as we talk about, carry your cross and follow me, right? And here is a perfect example of his disciples doing that in the moment. They're all carrying their crosses and following him. Even the girls, right, are not left out of this. And I think that's very intentional here. I think the storytelling here is really, really beautiful stuff. But yeah, really cool.
Which one of you does this belong to?
So the whole point of the writing for the Romans here is to get us to hate this guy. We are supposed to really dislike this guy. We're supposed to think he's crude, that he is misogynist, maybe, that we are supposed to really, really dislike him. He's the guy that put the helmet on Jesus. He's the one that's touching Tamar here. He's the one that's going to make a crude joke in a second. This is like the epitome of what we're supposed to see the Romans as through the eyes of the Jewish people.
Come on.
And you can see the difference between Judas and Jesus. Jesus is not having fun here, but he is staying humble here, as where Judas is pouting.
Never could have imagined a moment like this.
He said to submit, so we submit.
And that's Peter's mindset. He said, we submit, so we're going to submit. That's what I'm going to do. And everybody else is on that same page except for Judas here.
The painful irony of some of his teaching.
The painful irony of some of his teaching. Yeah, absolutely.
You know what the holy man who performed the circumcision say?
What?
The pay is lousy, but we get to keep the tips.
That's a really bad joke, right? I saw a lot of people reacting to this, and they were like, oh, I cannot believe they wrote that in here. However, it does show a piece of the crudeness that would be from the Roman people, right? And so we're seeing that crudeness come from that joke there about circumcision and getting to keep the tips. It's very not interesting. Also, the accent that he's doing is like a making fun of their accent, basically.
The canis. The sign is the mile marker.
So this is the mile marker I was talking about before. Most of the time this would be outside of a city or outside of an outpost. And so here they're kind of doing the reverse of what I think would be normal, which is they're getting close to an outpost. It's a mile outside of that outpost is where this mile marker is. And so they've actually gone a mile before that. And then now they're going into the mile marker before they get to the outpost. So it's a little bit different than what I would assume would happen normally.
In your entire lives, I bet you've never been so grateful for the enshrined Roman law.
We know this has been an honor for all of you.
Stop here!
So they're all going to drop their stuff, and Jesus continues on. Again, we can see that he's kind of in pain. Like, this is not comfortable for him at all.
I said stop!
The destination is that outpost a mile ahead, yes?
It is, but we're only permitted 1 mile.
By coercion. There's no law against citizens assisting you the rest of the way of their own volition.
It's different to teach something than to live it out, right? And so Jesus here is really surprising everybody, including Peter, including Philip, including Thaddeus, including everybody, right? But Judas, most of all, is surprised by this for sure. Because, again, he thinks that Jesus is supposed to be overthrowing the Romans, not bowing down to them and putting in more effort than they even ask him to.
Come, my friends.
But
If anyone says anything, say that we offered.
Now, this obviously stuns the Romans. This is a pretty big deal. I think this is really interesting because this brings us to a passage that I find really, really interesting, but we're going to go through a couple of them. First off is Romans 12, verse 19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This is what Jesus is doing here. This passage is actually from Proverbs, I think chapter 25. And so here, let me see here. Yeah, Proverbs chapter 25, verse 21. So this is in a couple different spots in the Bible, but this comes from Proverbs, which Paul is writing in Romans here. And so we see that he is repeating here. If you want to do the best thing in retaliation, it is to be good to those who hate you, right? Which is such a hard teaching. It's like such a hard thing to get through because we are not naturally going to lean towards that, right? Same thing here in Luke chapter 6. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, give everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. That's the golden rule that we all know right there. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? And again, repeating some of the things that we saw in Matthew chapter 5 there. So there's a lot of stuff here that's like just repeating over and over again. But this is one of my absolute favorites when we talk about if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. In other words, you will purify the situation. So this isn't necessarily saying, hey, you're going to actually like burn them. Like, hey, if you want to really stick it to the man, be good to them, right? What it's saying is, at least one interpretation of this is you're pouring burning coals on someone in order to purify them, in order to purify the situation, in order to make it whole. So you are taking the situation and you're turning it to glorify God rather than to glorify the person who is harming you. And so that's what turn the other cheek does. That's what walking the second mile does. That's what forgetting about a payment that someone owes you does, right? All of these things turn that evil thing of not repaying a payment or doing something else into a great thing, right? Of glorifying God overall. So it's a really, really cool moment here. And watch what happens in The Chosen, as this is perfectly exemplified as well. Now Judas has a big problem here. We've gone over this in a different video. We're going to skip forward and we want to see the reaction here of what's actually happening.
Maybe, let us take back the helmets, so there's no confusion at the outpost.
So he's saying, let us take back the helmets just in case they confuse you guys for Roman soldiers. And, you know, there's a confusion at the outpost when we get there. And it's just a funny thing here. I love during this scene that Jesus never has to touch the helmet, that he didn't put it on and he's not going to have to take it off.
If you like.
Give me that. Yeah, give me that. All right. Yeah, hand me that. I'll take it.
I've got it.
Hey, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile,
Go with him too.
Again, rephrasing or saying again, repeating Matthew 5 there, which is the Sermon on the Mount. So really, really good stuff there. I love that section. Even the ending part here where they get back to their stuff. All their stuff is still there, and it's a really interesting scene here as well.
Yes.
When you said go another mile, it's actually 3.
Because if they walk 1 mile, they only have to walk 1 back. But if they go the extra mile, they have to walk 2 more miles on top of that, plus the 1 all the way back. So that's 3 miles total.
Including the 2 to come back and get our stuff. It's a miracle it's still here.
So none of their stuff was stolen. That's a big thing, for sure.
That's right. I'm very proud of you. I know how hard that was for you. But you all did so well. Now, on to Bethany.
So I know how hard that was for you, but you all did so well. Now on to Bethany. This is another moment where Judas is kind of failing a little bit here. He doesn't take in stride what Jesus is trying to teach him here. This is kind of his second strike in the season so far. So really, really cool stuff. A lot of cool scriptural moments tied in there. But Jesus is teaching here of loving your enemy and moving past what they're doing to you and letting God have the glory anyway. It's such a hard thing, but if you can master forgiveness, if you can master moving forward in life, this is such a massive skill. It's such a huge thing for people when they get to that point of trusting in God so much and understanding what he's wanting from us, you know, that we glorify him anyway, right? It's such a big deal. And if you can get to that point where you're not worried about your enemies, you're not worried about what the world is going to throw at you, it'll change your life. Absolutely.